might, for right. We are double dragons. Settle down. I'm a dragon too.
Hello, I'm Omnivorous, and honestly, I'm not that excited about the Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. There really wasn't enough reprints for my liking, but there are some really interesting cards included in this new set, and one of them is gonna be today's Commander, Miriam. Miriam Sentinel Worm allows us to combine big flying dragon beaters with a mass amount of clone effects, giving us a great flying army to just overwhelm any and all foes on the board. Since dragons are super expensive, we're gonna reduce that cost, then we're gonna bring out some heavy damaging and heavy attacking dragons, and then we'll copy them, and just for the hell of it, we'll add some doubling effects to make sure that we're getting all of the token copies of all of the dragons that we want. We're going to be throwing out more copies than Xerox makes in a year. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you've been enjoying my videos and want to keep up with all of my content. Looking at the commander for our dragon cloning lab, we have Miriam, the Sentinel Worm. It's a 6/6 flying ward 2 for 3, 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red. It has, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if the dragon is legendary. So it is literally double dragon whenever we cast a dragon spell, and the cool thing about this is it's an enter the battlefield effect, so it does trigger whenever we cheat it into the battlefield, or whenever we, say, blink it or do other shenanigans. This is the perfect engine to give us our army of cloned dragons. First thing we need to do for this deck is get our dragons on the battlefield, and they are going to be super expensive, so we're going to reduce that cost by a bit. Some of the best cards at providing that cost reduction are going to be Herald's Horn and Urza's Incubator. Both are artifacts that come on the battlefield for only 3 mana, and then they choose a creature type. Herald's Horn reduces the cost of creature spells of the chosen type by 1, and then at the beginning of your upkeep allows you to look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may put it into your hand. Urza's Incubator is a straightforward 2 mana cost reduction for creatures of the chosen type. Similarly, we have Dragon Speaker Shaman and Dragon Lord Servant. Both reduce the cost of dragon spells. The Shaman will reduce the cost by 2, and the Servant reduces them by 1. Then we have Ganax, Astral Hunter. This is less of a cost reduction and more of a refund, because it has whenever Ganax, Astral Hunter, or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a treasure token, effectively giving you a bank of mana whenever you get a dragon. An honorable mention is Corlessa, Scale Singer. This card doesn't actually give you any kind of mana or give you a reduction in the mana cost, but it does let you look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast dragon spells from the top of your library. So if you ever are caught and you need to cast spells, you can always refer to the top of your deck instead. So the first group of dragons we're going to look at are those that deal out massive amounts of damage, allowing us to control the board, take out specific threats, and kill our foes outright. These guys are great for a barbecue. First off, we have the new Wrathful Red Dragon. It has, whenever a dragon you control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dragon. This guy's a nice little insurance policy, making your opponents a little more fearful to take out your dragons with damage or attack into your flying board. It's also great to note that it doesn't have to be an opponent's source of damage to trigger this guy, so if you happen to Blasphemous Act with a lot of dragons on the board, well, you're going to win the game. Then we have the Balefire Dragon and Ryusei, the Falling Star. Both will allow us to control the board by burning out our opponent's creatures. The Balefire Dragon deals damage to them equal to the combat damage dealt to the opponent, and Ryusei will deal 5 damage to each creature without flying when it dies. Whenever Drakaseth Maw of Flames attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and then 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets, making it a great fire breather for us. Dragon Lord Atarka is a big girl who deals big damage for us when she enters the battlefield. 5 damage divided as we choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers opponents control. And then she's an 8/8 flying trampler, a definite threat. We also have Inferno of the Star Mounts. This spell can't be countered. It is a 6/6 with flying and haste, and then for 1 red, Inferno of the Star Mounts gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When its power becomes 20 this way, it deals 20 damage to any target. A literal fire breather. Lastly, we have one of the all-stars of this deck, Terror of the Peaks. It has, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target, basically letting it throw fire equal to all of your big flyers that you're going to have come out. This is a death sentence with the amount of big creatures that we're going to be flooding the board with on this deck. An honorable mention is going to be the Dragon Tempest. It has, whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until end of turn, letting you go ahead and just swing out with all of your big old flying dragons once we get them out. But it also has, whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player where X is the number of dragons you control. This is ridiculous once we start cloning and making lots of copies of our clones. Alright, so we have our fire-breathing dragons that are going to deal all of our damage to us. Now we need some big body dragons to attack our foes and beat people down. Our first offensive threats are going to be those that actually give us card advantage too, in Dragonborn Champion, Imarith Desert Doom, and Fearcrag, the Cunning Instigator. Our Dovahkiin Champion is a 5/3 with Trample that has, whenever a source you control deals 5 or more damage to a player, draw a card. Imarith Desert Doom protects itself with Ward 4 as long as it's untapped, and has, whenever Imarith deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then if you have fewer cards than 3 in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So it has the opportunity to really get you back into the game. Then there's the unassuming Fearcrag Cunning Instigator. It has flying and haste, and whenever 1 or more dragons you control attack an opponent, go target creature that player controls. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, if that creature had to attack this combat, put a +1/+1 counter on Fearcrag, and you draw a card. So basically Fearcrag forces your opponents to attack with creatures, and then it'll get the draw and get bigger whenever those creatures actually get through on other opponents. This is great when you actually have 2 or more Fearcrags on the battlefield, because the effects will stack and you will get multiple cards and multiple goads. Up next we have Kaiga, the Tide Star. Kaiga is interesting because whenever it dies, it gains control of target creatures. So if you happen to have it killed by an opponent, then that opponent happens to most likely lose the best creature that they have. It's great when you have multiple Kaigas on board because, again, we're going to be cloning our dragons like none other. Then we have 2 dragons that will give us lots of mana so that we can continue putting out other dragons. Clouth, Unrivaled Ancient, has, whenever it attacks, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this mana only to cast spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. And then there's the Ancient Copper Dragon. Whenever Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Yeah, you could roll low, but you're more likely going to get 10 to 15 treasures off of one attack. And lastly, we have the Ancient Bronze Dragon. Whenever Ancient Bronze Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures where X is the result. Again, the results for these Ancient Dragons are usually going to be about 10-15 on average, so that is a big power increase. Alright, so we've got our big dragons and several ways to get them out onto the battlefield. Now let's see how many times we can copy them. Let's send in the clones. So the first clones we're going to look at are going to be our more versatile clones: Clever Impersonator, Glasspool Mimic, and Vizier of Many Faces. Clever Impersonator can copy anything, including your best dragons or even some of your best support enchantments or artifacts. This guy is amazing. The Glasspool Mimic doubles as a land, so if we happen to need it to be a land, it can be a land, but if we happen to need it to be a big old dragon clone, it can be a big old dragon clone. And then we have the Vizier of Many Faces. The Vizier is pretty nice because it can come back. After it's been killed, you can embalm it and bring it back again, allowing it to clone again. We have 3 spells that are basically variations of a theme. They all can copy a creature and then will have the ability to be cast from our graveyard for another copy of a creature. We have Quasi-Duplicate, Cackling Counterpart, and Croaking Counterpart. The better 2 are Quasi-Duplicate and Cackling Counterpart. These guys will give you a straight-up copy of the creature with the ability to either jumpstart or flashback respectively. Croaking Counterpart is a little bit different. It gives you a 1/1 green frog that is a copy of your creature, so it'll give you a big old dragon frog. Now, the difference is that it can copy your opponent's creatures, but it isn't something that we really want. I guess we're gonna go with 1/1 green frogs. Sure, frog dragons. Mirror Hall Mimic and Progenitor Mimic will give you a copy of a specific creature each turn. Mirror Hall Mimic comes down and copies any creature you want, and then when it dies, you can cast it for its disturb cost. Then it comes back as an enchantment that has, at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of the enchanted creature, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. This is the same ability as the Progenitor Mimic, which says you may have Progenitor Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if this creature isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of the creature. Again, giving us a clone at the beginning of each upkeep. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces is another 4-cost clone effect, really effective because it also has the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. This means that you can copy your legendary dragons without having any fear of them dying from the legend rule. We also have the Lithoform engine. This legendary artifact lets us copy target activated or triggered ability, lets us copy target instant or sorcery spell, or even copy target permanent spell. It's a little Swiss Army knife of clone and copying abilities that any clone or copy spell deck should be looking at. And then there's the Rite of Replication. For 4 mana, you get your typical cloning effect, not bad at all, but for 5 more, you can kick it and create 5 copies of a creature instead. This is the biggest mass clone effect in the game. So we've got our dragons and we've got our clones. Now let's look at what token effects we can use to help flood the board with flying threats. First, we're going to look at a few creatures that outright give us some dragon tokens in Dragon Broodmother, Dragon Master Outcast, and Lathless Dragon Queen. Dragon Broodmother gives us a 1/1 red-green dragon token with flying and devour 2, which lets us sacrifice other creatures to it to make it bigger if we want to. Dragon Master Outcast has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. Lathless Dragon Queen lets us double up all of our dragons even more by giving us another dragon token whenever a non-token dragon enters the battlefield. Up next is Riku of 2 Reflections and Adrix and Niv, Twin Casters. Riku has, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay a blue and a red. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. More importantly, it says, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 green and 1 blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, basically doubling up our commander's ability to double up our dragons. Adrix and Niv are even more ridiculous. They have Ward 2 to protect themselves, but they also have, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. This gets ridiculous and out of hand, and it will be something that I'll touch on in a little bit. We have 2 enchantments that also have that same ability as Adrix and Niv, with Doubling Season and Parallel Lives. They both say, if an effect would create one or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. This deck really doesn't worry about the second ability of Doubling Season that doubles up the number of counters that go on our cards. It's just a nice little bonus if it happens to become relevant. It rarely is. The big thing with both of these enchantments is that they do double up the tokens that we get from our commander, giving us even more dragon army to kill our opponents with. Rounding out our clone effects are two enchantments, the Mirror Box and the Helm of the Host. Mirror Box will take out the legend rule for us and give us a +1/+1 for each legendary creature. It also has each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. So basically, our originals will get another plus, whereas our clones will not. The Helm of the Host is very much like the Progenitor Mimic, giving us a clone of a creature that it's equipped to every combat, but it also will circumvent the legend rule. Okay. So, I alluded to this a little bit earlier as this deck gets nutty when it comes to what it does with the copy effects and all the different ways you can clone your dragons. And there's one dragon in particular that really shows off what that can happen with this. It is going to be the Astral Dragon that just came out. Grab your ibuprofen and stay calm as I walk you through this ridiculous shit. So first, let's look at the Astral Dragon. It is a 4/4 flyer for 6 and 2 blue. It has, when Astral Dragon enters the battlefield, create 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent, except they're a 3/3 dragon creature in addition to their other types, and they have flying. Seems pretty straightforward. It is a 4/4 for 8 mana, which is kind of expensive, but it does give you 2 more flying bodies. Now, when we look at how it interacts with our commander, when it enters the battlefield, our commander will make a token copy of it. So we will actually get 2 Astral Dragons when it enters the battlefield, thanks to Miriam. Those 2 dragons will now create 2 tokens of their own, giving us a total of 4 3/3 flying dragons. Not bad. So for playing 1 Astral Dragon, we actually get 2 Astral Dragons and 4 Drakes. That's a grand total of 6 dragons. Hey, that's pretty cool. But what happens if we happen to throw Doubling Season into the mix? This card will double all of our token generations. So the Miriam trigger will create 2 Astral Dragons instead of 1, and each of the Astral Dragons will actually create 4 dragon clones of whatever non-creature permanent we want. Pretty cool, right? So instead of getting 2 Astral Dragons, we will get 3 Astral Dragons. And with each of those dragons making 4 more dragons, we'll get 12 more tokens. So the end result is 15 dragons for the cost of 1. That's pretty good too, huh? Yeah. Who can complain about that? But that is absolutely the wrong way to be going about it. One of the advanced rule concepts in Magic is something known as the stack. Basically, the stack dictates how spells and effects go off. The first things that go on the stack are the last things that go off. Why is this important? Well, we can actually choose the order that these spells and effects resolve. And if we do a little bit of manipulation, we can make this even more ridiculous. How do we go about doing that? Well, the first thing we want to do is put the Miriam trigger on the stack first, and then we want to put the Astral Dragon trigger on the stack. This will have our Astral Dragon trigger resolve and give us our dragon copy tokens, the 3/3 flyers that copy a non-creature permanent. So we'll get our 4 3/3 flying dragon copies first. This is important because we can make those copies into copies of Doubling Season. Now, when the Miriam trigger resolves, it sees all 5 of our Doubling Seasons. The first Doubling Season takes it to 2, the second to 4, then to 8, then to 16, and lastly we end up with 32 copies of the actual Astral Dragon. But it gets worse from there. Each of those 32 copies of Astral Dragon will enter the battlefield and have their own trigger go off. That'll give them the 2/3/3 flying dragons that copy a non-creature permanent. But we still have doubling seasons on the battlefield. 5 of them to be exact. So now those 2 dragons go to 4, which go to 8, which go to 16, which go to 32, which go to 64. But it doesn't end there. That is just the first of our 32 Astral Dragons to enter the battlefield. And that one Astral Dragon has made 64 3/3 flying dragons that can copy more doubling seasons. At this point, we're looking at such exponential growth that we could have billions of dragons before the entire 32 Astral Dragons are done. I studied music and audio production, so I'm not doing the math. But with just the 5 doubling seasons, it gets over 1,000 dragons. And this is just one example of how the deck can go off and make thousands and billions of dragons. You also have Parallel Lives, which does the exact same thing as doubling season. Panharmonicon, which can actually increase the number of the enter the battlefield effects with both Miriam and the Astral Dragon getting the bonus there. And Adrix and Niv can also help out in a pinch. This is just complete cloning carnage. It is impressive how we can take over the game with all of our dragons. Like all of our decks, we need to support this deck with adequate ramp, especially since we're going to be looking to play some big old Durgans, and we need to be able to pay for it. It's Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Don't fall asleep on me. These guys are just essential, really. Then there's 3 Visits, Nature's Lore, and Farseek. I'm happy to see that Wizards has started to realize that these cards are almost as essential as the Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, and have started to put them back into rotation in their commander decks. Then there's the Orb of Dragonkind, Dragon's Horde, and the Birds of Paradise. The Orb of Dragonkind will act as our signet, allowing us to filter for mana that we need for our dragons, but also can activate and dig for a dragon if we want. The Dragon's Horde will allow us to get mana for any color for anything, but also allow us to draw off of our casting dragons. And then there's the Birds. Really a great card for any deck that is really strapped for mana and has green. For our card draw, we have Rishkar's Expertise and Rhystic Study. Both of these guys are great in decks that have a premium on card slots and need really effective draw. Supporting the deck is 2 Sarkhans, Sarkhan Unbroken and Sarkhan Fireblood. Sarkhan Unbroken draws you a card, gives you a mana, and then it can make a 4/4 flying dragon token, and then it can also grab all of the dragons out of your deck and put them on the battlefield. This is great with Miriam because it will trigger Miriam's cloning abilities. The Fireblood is very similar. It'll allow you to discard a card to draw a card. It can add 2 mana in any combination so that you can spend it for your dragons, and then it can create 4 5/5 red dragon tokens. We're also going to be using the 2 modal double face cards. God damn, I hate that name. Why did they think that was cool? Anyway, these 2 MDFCs are going to be Seagate Restoration and Turn Timber Symbiosis. The Restoration will draw us cards equal to the cards in our hand and give us no maximum hand size. Great for getting a lot of cards. And then the Turn Timber Symbiosis will let us look at the top 7 cards of our library and then pick a creature and put it onto the battlefield. If it costs 3 or less, it gets a buff, but chances are we're going for some big old Durgan. If we don't want them to do any of that, they can also double as lands, hence the MDFC title. Last little bit of support that we have to talk about is the Panharmonicon. We alluded to it a little bit when we talked about Astral Dragon, but Panharmonicon will double our Miriam triggers whenever we have a dragon enter the battlefield. It'll also add an additional trigger for a lot of other abilities. Moving on to removal, we have some of our best removal that we can get in our universal removal spells, Chaos Warp and Beast Within. Both will let us pick off specific permanents of any type, giving our opponents a little bit of an upside, but usually it's best just to get rid of the big threat once and for all. And lastly, we have some board wipes to help us control the game and not get overwhelmed. We have Cyclonic Rift, Blasphemous Act, and Klaus Will. Cyclonic Rift is classic because, again, it can hit anything that our opponents have on the board at instant speed, really great. The Blasphemous Axe usually is super cheap, 1 or 2 mana, depending on the board state, and then Klaus Will can actually double, sweeping the board of a lot of the creatures on the ground, as well as picking off specific artifacts and enchantments. I'm not gonna lie, this deck is pricey. It's a little up there. So here are our top 10 budget substitutions to make the deck a little bit more affordable, and as always, I will have a full budget list available for you linked in the description. We replace Rhystic Study with Return of the Wild Speaker, doubling season drops for Second Harvest, Parallel Lives pulls out for Molten Echoes, Cyclonic Rift is replaced by Renari, Merchant of Marvels, Balefire Dragon drops for the Scourge of Valkis, Dare of the Peaks pisses off for Warstorm Surge, Urza's Incubator is out for Cursed Mirror, Seagate Restoration is replaced by Minion of the Mighty, Ancient Copper Dragon goes for Skyline Despot, and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces fades for Reflections of Littjara. And that will do it for the deck. Like I said, I'm not really hot for a lot of the Baldur's Gate cards, but man, I really like this dragon. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to make some clone deck. Let me know in the comments how you liked it. Or would you have done it differently? What other dragons did I miss? Keep it here at the all-consuming Nerddom channel for more Magic the Gathering, Commander, and other nerdy content. Or you can check out my Twitch channel where I regularly play RPGs, usually the underrated or underappreciated, to see what makes them tick. And that'll do it for the video. Y'all stay hungry, and thanks for watching.